Hi, Laurie. Welcome to the Women
Hi,
Awaken podcast.
thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. Laurie, I'm really excited to get into this conversation with you. We had connected to talk about your work and the things we'd like to explore on the show. And you are a 25-year practitioner of Chinese medicine. You're a healer, you're an artist, and you really focus on guiding women to their heart health by tapping into their inner medicine and wellness. And you help lead women down a path of health, ease, abundance, and love to heal mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual bodies. And you help women to feel empowered, enlightened in their relationships and their life force. So all of this to say, you're really helping people, it sounds like, kind of clear out their channels, right? Where they have blocks within like mind, body, spirit. And those blocks often occur from things like grief and loss and a broken heart.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's what we wanted to kind of focus on is the unique experience, the unique emotional pain of heartbreak that is very real. Sometimes it really feels like something's just tearing apart in there, right?
absolutely.
And
Yeah,
it can be so hard, but then it's also the mental part of how do I know when I've gone through a breakup, it's like, how can I stop thinking about this person? How do I let it go? How do I get it out of my system? And it
yeah.
sounds like you do that, right? You focus on women's systems and how to release. So that's enough out of me. Just an introduction for you. Can you tell us more specifically about this work with so you use the word Q, is that chi, QI?
Qi. It could be chi or ki, but in
Okay.
Chinese medicine, they call it chi. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so take it away, share with us about further into this process and your work would be
Yeah,
wonderful.
well, chi is the best place to start because it's just a Chinese word for energy or life force. And I love that you said light force, not meaning, and then you corrected yourself and said life force, because every particle of life force on the planet in the universe is light, right? So you were like really tapping into something there. um but yeah, everything is this energy, right? So we have dense things that we can see like chairs, and then we have like the most refined in Chinese medicine, the most refined kind of chi are our thoughts or our consciousness. And what's really interesting, so before I say that, what another thing I love about Chinese medicine is there is no separation. There's no like cordoning off of mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. Like it's all a part of one big system that, when we get out of our own way, can operate in this sort of like higher wholeness way. And all of that is coded in our cells. This is I love people to know this because we have 50 to 70 trillion cells, and in every single cell there's like 50 to 70 trillion atoms, and every single one of those atoms is a blueprint for this wholeness. It's also the light that you mentioned before. So my reason for saying that is like that's a lot of wholeness in comparison or in counterbalance to the things that we go through as human beings that feel like we're just going to, they're going to take us down, like heartbreak and loss and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the nutshell version of how I just make sure that everybody I work with is 100% aligned with all that they are. And 96% of who we are is non-physical. This is kind of an interesting thing, right? Like, it's more consciousness and life force that we don't see than the 4%, which is what we do see. And that's a hard thing because when our heart's breaking or we've had loss of any kind, really, I mean, it could be for a pet, it could be for a relationship, it could be for a life we didn't have that we thought we were going to have, it could be for, a child, it could be, there's any number of ways that we experience loss. I've come to really discover that when our heart is broken open, part of what's happening is the opportunity for us to get initiated into the next level of who we really are, like part of that wholeness that we mentioned earlier. And it isn't always easy. And so there are ways that we can more gracefully navigate through that heartbreak or that initiation, if you will, or we can just dig our heels in and resist it, and that's what makes it more like an experience of suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. And what popped in my mind, Laurie, I'm not sure if this is related, but you said that it can be an initiation. And when I think, I actually did an episode about how heartbreak is a catalyst
Yeah.
for growth. And does it have anything to do in your mind with attachment? In that when we feel our heart is broken, it's often because we feel that we're losing something and that we needed something, and that it's, and of course, if you're, especially if it's a emotional, romantic heartbreak, we'll miss somebody. Yet,
Yeah.
to your point, we're mostly light beings, energetic beings. We're very little physical. So I feel like it's the attachment to that physical, because in reality, when, let's say, we lose a relationship, there's that person's energy can still be with us. We're just not
Totally.
experiencing them physically. So in the bigger scheme, I mean, in one lifetime, someone might not make it to the point where they can break up with somebody and find that peace and just release it. But I think over time, we're all working to evolve to the point where I always use the analogy of a tree. There's a quote I love that says the tree, or be like a tree where birds come and go and they have no preference. So it's like
Right. Right.
we experience love, and then when love ends, we trust that it's just the end of that experience and we let it go. So do you think it's an initiation to recognizing our attachments to things and where we're sort of holding on to things? Because breakups happen for a reason, right? It means that
Everything happens for a reason. Yeah.
everything happens for a reason. So two people's union and coming together has run its course, and it's for the highest good of both when a relationship ends. Yet that we get attached to certain things, right? So I'd love to hear your perspective. Like, is that how you kind of see things, or how do you see
Yeah,
the
well,
growth?
I don't think I would use the word attachment, but it comes up all the time, so it's totally reasonable to use that word. But in my worldview or spirit view, it's like everything that happens in our lives, and I like to say for us instead of to us, is for the sole purpose of bringing us into more of who we really are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And who we really are is already whole, and by the way, you used that acronym earlier, health, expression, abundance, and love. That's an acronym for heal, and that's all we're doing, all of us, is we're healing more into ourselves. We're releasing, healing is really the releasing of who we're not. So if we're attached, and that's part of what's causing our greatest pain, then what if the lesson is something like, if you're attached to, let's say it was the love, then the messaging of it, or the intelligence in that, is that we get to cultivate more of that in our own selves rather than relying on something outside of ourselves. Is that sort of what you were asking?
Yeah, just sort of what is actually going on, and what can be learned from the heartbreak process from that
Yeah,
group.
I mean, what can always be learned is how can this teach me to open my heart more and be in more connection with my higher presence, my higher self, and let that energy operate through me as me. And we have all kinds of ways in which we don't do that. So we have lots of ways that we can practice doing it.
Okay. So then what would Chinese medicine say about
Yeah,
breakup?
well, this is where I feel like it gets really quite interesting, because the heart in Chinese medicine is the seat of consciousness. And we've just been talking about life force and higher presence, that we can also call it consciousness or energy, right? So it's like the heart is the throne of all of that. And just to sort of use the terminology that we did earlier, is that if our heart gets broken, it's being broken open to more of our wholeness, like to the opening that is this energy center called our heart, that houses our consciousness, so that we can connect into that more and more. I like to see my heart now as like a chalice, whereby light is constantly pouring in and kind of filling it to overflowing, like we see fountains in a park, you know, because I know then that spills into all of my cells, and anything that is, I'm resisting, or that I have pain over, or that I'm still holding as in terms of trauma, or wounds or grief. I mean, some of these energies, like if someone loses their child, they can still feel that loss and that grief, holding alongside the grace of opening their heart to more love. right? So I'm not talking about just erasing all of these emotions. I'm talking about like evolving ourselves beyond them so that they're still present as our life experience in this human experience, but we're more than that.
Yeah. So when you work with clients, let's say that you have somebody, and I'd like to explore other facets of grief, but if you have somebody who just had a really painful breakup and it's pretty
Yes.
fresh and they are just feeling just that really, because grief really does feel heavy. I know that when I'm in deep grief, I feel weighed down. It just feels heavy. I feel literally depressed. It's sort of my system feels depressed. I'm moving slower. I'm wanting to do less. And it feels just terrible. It feels like you can't get it out. So what do you offer people that they can practice to, even if they're aware, okay, this is a part of my growth. These are growing pains. It is being broken open so that we can open our hearts and expand our understanding of, of love, of life, of why things come and go and how we can appreciate them. Yeah. How can you help them through that process? What kind of tools can you offer them?
Yeah, there's there's a whole toolkit of that, but let's just talk about ones that we can reach for right in this moment. I think that the first one is being willing to turn into the grief rather than resist it, or whatever the experience or emotion is, because the resistance is actually what just adds fuel to the fire. Leaning into it and letting it flow through us. Chinese medicine is very clear that the human emotions that we have are designed to flow through us, but not become cesspools in us, right? Like we're really good at the human level of accumulating all this, this hard emotional energy and sort of living in it like quicksand. And that isn't the design of a human being. So leaning in helps it flow through. And of course, breath, especially for grief, because in Chinese medicine, grief is the emotion of the lungs. And so breath is imperative, like a deep breath, and there's a million deep breathing practices that people can find for themselves. But just being present with the feeling of the grief and breathing with it will dissipate a large part of it. And then, then you can just move on about your life with it, but not stunted by it, if that makes sense. And the other thing, another really simple trick is tapping is, EFT, emotional freedom technique, is a lovely tool. And the very simplicity of, I don't know if you can see or if it matters, but this place right between, our breasts and on our sternum, and it's true for men and women. You can just make a loose fist and tap on it, or you can just use 3 fingers of one hand and just tap on it. And if you do that while you're leaning in and breathing, there's a pretty good opening or release of, or allowing of the energy to flow. And sometimes if you need to talk out loud, like you're talking to like your dearest friend who would have no judgment about what you say, and you're in a place where no one's hearing you, just talk out loud about, wow, this is really, it's really hard, it's heavy, and talking out loud and just ranting about it. And I don't mean ranting at the top of your lungs, but just, a flow of words while you're tapping is very moving for that energy. So that's a pretty in the moment, quick and easy thing one can do.
Okay. So to start moving the energy so that you can sort of feel some relief, do you think it helps people to feel less grief as they start
Well,
to?
it helps people. I'm not gonna say less grief. I'm gonna say it helps them to move grief, which is the design of any emotion. All energy is designed to move. It's not designed to be stuck. It's why movement is really important for human body, because things get stuck if we don't move, and emotions are just right up there with them. So yeah.
How would you describe the experience, what's going on when somebody is having a heartbreak, when they're grieving from that? Because it does feel very hard to move that energy. It can weigh heavy on you. But it can also just, it can feel almost like a physical illness, even like it's
Yeah,
just like, it's just
absolutely.
kind of taken over. So again, of course, illness is also like a lack of energy moving through the body and stuck energy. So if these kind of help to move things along, how would you describe like what else is going on? Just to give people an idea of like, because people can mourn the loss of a relationship for like a year, and they can feel like, God, I need some relief. Like, what can help me move through this?
Right. Well, I think, some of the stuff we've talked about, just the in the moment things, like I think that that's really important, to give the energy an opening to move. And then as we grieve for long periods of time, I mean, it's no accident that other cultures, not necessarily the American culture, ask for people to give their grief about a year, right? Because it's a thing. It isn't something that we can just turn a light switch on and flip it off.
Mm-hmm.
But the other side of that coin is that there are beautiful gems in there. Like where in this thing that I'm calling grief, what is the common thing that keeps coming up? Do I feel empty? Do I feel like I'll never have love again? Whatever the common theme is, then that's the come hither, if you will, from our higher self, from our soul, to say, hey, if you look at this, you can evolve yourself into, a kind of love that you were hoping for, that you're not getting, that you're no longer going to get from that relationship or whatever the thing you're grieving.
Yeah.
From accessing love from a higher place, if that makes sense, from all of us, right? Because we all have the capacity to be so filled with love, not necessarily romantic love. Romantic love is an experience we get to have in a human form.
Mm-hmm.
But the entire fabric of the universe is made of love. What if there's so much love that we're drowning ourselves in it, and we can't even see it or feel it or know it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that goes back to what you're saying. It's a growth opportunity. It, sort of breaks things open so you can expand and evolve, because again, I mean, that's why I use the word attachment, is that we think that this is the only love I'll know. I fell in love with this person, we shared something, and without it, I have nothing. I don't have love. But what you're speaking to is the idea that you don't need that person to feel love. Love is everywhere. Love is everything. You are love. Love is within you. It's also, there's a even greater source of love that isn't conditional. Because I think most human relationships still have a lot of conditionality within them, right? We don't yet know that well how to love people unconditionally all the time. And I think
Well, that's
especially
what
with
pets are for.
yes, all right. Yes, pets are they truly are soul companion gifts that show
They
you
teach us the feeling of unconditional love, for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they show us the experience of pure joy. Because if
Absolutely.
you've ever seen a dog jump out of the car and run into a dog park,
it's glorious.
It's just the embodiment of joy. So they're true gifts to us in this world. Yet I think that, again, people think I think the heartbreak is because they feel they've lost something. In truth, nothing is lost. But I do think there is something to say about when two people create a connection, they literally almost birth. The love is something they birth together, right? You would birth this whole entity of a relationship, and then when it splits, you do kind of both take your energy back, and that thing is no longer.
Yes,
you can
so
a lot of it
is to recalibrate ourselves, as without having that love as part of our field anymore.
Yeah. And that's hard for us as physical beings.
It is hard. I definitely want to acknowledge that. And relationships are our greatest workshops, right? Like, they teach us where all the things are that are asking for us to, evolve ourselves into as more. I use that word a lot because I've come to learn that everything is evolving. Everything is in this sort of dynamic movement. And so it just makes sense for me to say it that way. Yes, we can say it's growth. Yes, we can say our soul and our heart is expanding. But relationships teach us that. And if we're attached to one particular love and find ourselves thinking, I'll never have love again, that right there is the intelligent message. Oh, that's not true, because it feels true. I'm not negating that. But what if a greater truth, because there's always like what we feel is truth, and then there's a greater truth, right? And so our work, I consider this to be my job as a human being. My job is to acknowledge and accept that this is how it's feeling right now, and then reach for a greater truth that I may not have known before, and let that teach me who I really am beyond just this one love that I thought I was attached to.
Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of people will say, that after a heartbreak, they have a strong sense of empowerment.
Yeah.
Because they've recognized and realized something that they maybe didn't know before, right?
Yes.
Which is, well, which is that they are, very capable of
Resi-
moving on. They're resilient,
Yes.
right? They're able to get through, that they didn't die from this, this deep pain, this deep sadness. And then they do recognize, they're like, well, maybe there's even a higher love than this. This was a great, I blessed this experience, but again, it ended for a reason. And now I move on to the next, right? And I think the more that people recognize that, they can, I mean, we must acknowledge our feelings. There will always be a sense of loss with the ending of something or with any type of grief. Yet the quicker that we can learn about, this process, and that it's always leading us to, for our highest good, that we can move on.
Yeah, we can move into more of ourselves, with whatever that degree of loss was. That does change over time. It does become, easier. And I love the analogy of this might be a little flowery, no pun intended for some people, but the analogy of a lotus, because the lotus flower grows out of this dark, dank mud, and it's thick and ugly, and nobody, there's no beauty in that, supposedly. But then the light pulls this lotus flower up, and it becomes this beautiful, blossom.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like our emotions and our hard stuff and all of the things that we live through that that force us to grow, it's kind of like that mud. It's compost. It is our compost. And we want to resist it and we want to make it go away. But what if it is the most nourishing part of our growth? It's just something to think about.
Would you work with somebody who feels that, who's had a grief, a loss that maybe it's been going on for 20 years and they cannot get rid of it and it feels impossible to let it go? Would you work with them on accepting that grief, or have you ever found a way to help somebody release grief that felt pretty chronic?
Yeah, well, I think it's a mixture of all of that. There has to be a level of acceptance for anything we're going through, right? That's what I mean by the leaning in and turning into rather than resisting, because the resisting is exhausting and it's like a push pull, it's a tug of war of energy, right? And all any human being really wants is to feel like they're operating in some version of integrity of everything they have access to for themselves, right? So that's that mind, body, spirit thing. And so the first thing I would do is I would work with them on finding acceptance. And then I would ask them who they want to be that's beyond that, and facilitate them in living themselves into that. And that may mean that they still feel the grief, and for some people it actually does get alchemized, and they get to say that they're sort of like no longer a chronic griever.
Right.
It's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah. Would that relate at all to you? You speak of, tapping into your inner medicine. Cause just to give an example that maybe you can share, how you would work with this, but I know you can have, grief over a regret, like a regret about maybe a decision you made or something that happened. And you can have grief around the choice you made. And I have something like that in my life, a choice that I made years ago that I can't do anything about, but I've felt grief over it ever since, and I can't let go of it. But yet I know, obviously I'm big into being, on my soul's path, connecting with my soul. And this decision had nothing to do with my soul. It had to do with the material world, something I lost that I thought I needed. And I've tried to find ways to connect with my higher self and be like, this doesn't have to bother you. Like, just be more aligned with your soul, but I can't seem to let it go. So, what would you say is going on there, and how can we also, because I think also if you can tap into your inner medicine, I would imagine that's the sense of love within us that knows that everything is okay and that we have the source within us to feel fulfilled. Right. Because the only reason I regret this decision, and I'm using my own example because I think other people have this, right?
Sure.
We've all made choices or had experiences where we're like, if I just hadn't, gone to the store that day, or if I just hadn't, made that decision, or then that would have never happened to me. And we can live our whole lives feeling this, what if, but if we can tap into higher power, which knows that everything happens for a reason, and that our acceptance of ourselves does never have to hinge on anything material. So do you have any tips for how to move into that higher state or get into that inner medicine where we can feel a sense of peace and acceptance? Because you said you help people with acceptance to relieve their grief. So anything you can say for people like me who have this sort of chronic one thing that just feels like it's so hard to make peace with?
Yeah. Well, what you're bringing up, I think, is tapping into when we talk about personal medicine, the personal medicine of self-forgiveness. So there's self-acceptance, there's self-compassion, and there's self-forgiveness, and those kind of are all a similar, energy, if you will. And I do not know how to do any work with myself without my connection to my higher self. Because if I'm disconnected, then it's my head, my human ego that's trying to like make the thing happen. And I've never found that to be successful. Actually, it just causes more, the energy to get tangled. But forgiveness. So here's something that you could play with, Whitney, that I actually love, because forgiveness is an interesting word. Like people are like, oh, sure. Well, trust my higher self. Well, that's easier said than done in specific moments when we're supposed to be, or if I fall off this cliff, am I going to be crashing to the ground, or am I going to get wings to fly? Like, what does that actually mean in a moment? One of the ways, so energy is not as fixed as a human mind wants to make it, right? Like we think it's linear, we think it's fixed meaning this thing happened. And yes, this thing happened, but is it more malleable than we give it credit for? So one of the things that I love is to go into a deeper sort of our still place, as still as one can get in meditation definitely helps with this, practicing finding that still place. And then let our consciousness sort of settle a little bit. You can put your hands on your heart, take some nice rhythmic breaths, because as heart math has proven for quite a while, 40 plus years, we get into a coherence in our heart center. And so this is another good thing one can do when they're feeling that, that heartbreak or that heaviness of loss, and go back to that thing. It's probably easier for you to pop yourself there, and in your consciousness, so this is on your imaginary screen, imagine that it had worked out a way that would have been more pleasing to you, or at the very least that you were less shocked by the way it worked out. Like you can change your response to the thing, if that makes sense, and sort of like be in that energy as if it's real right now. So you're activating yourself right now to a different response from the thing that happened in the past. And you'll want to, or you'll need, or however you want to put that, you'll want to do this as many times until you feel like in this moment now, that response is perfectly available to me. Does that make sense? And then that's a way of revising the energy, which is a form of forgiveness and acceptance. But mostly it gives you a different energy now in relationship to that thing. Were you able to access anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I heard what you're saying. I think that's a powerful exercise.
It is. It's very powerful, because everything is in the now. And then we have all this past stuff, and then we have all this stuff we want in the future. Sorry for that light. And really, if we come into our now and we play with the way we would want the energy to be now. So we could even say in the reference of heartbreak, like what would be my ideal outcome from this heartbreak? Well, I'm going to make something up now. I find my way through it. I realize I'm more, like you've said, more empowered, stronger, more resilient. And I end up tapping into some source of love. And I don't know where it's from, but it's flowing through my own heart. And I like that feeling a lot. In fact, it has a different flavor than the love I felt with my partner that I lost. So I'm going to let myself live in this for a while. And then it becomes part of our fabric. And then we get to consciously like design or orchestrate or cultivate or curate our own energy in reference to any one given thing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So do you work a lot with clients in this regard and kind of walking through this process?
I do. I have found this is a, just a, I have a lot of tools in my bag, and this one is newer, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. And it's like, it's powerful. It's powerful. The thing that someone has to be willing to do is find that centered, that quiet center point, and revisit whatever the thing is, and be willing to revise the energy in ways that they would prefer.
And that's helpful for them to feel like, does it make them feel like things happen differently, or it just shifts the energy?
It shifts the energy now. It shifts our energy now. So here we are now, and we have this relationship to this thing we have in the past. And, in your case, the relationship is not really changed that much. There's still this thing stuck, right?
Mm-hmm.
So changing your energy now in relationship to that, it helps tremendously.
Do you think that this is related to, because I think that a lot of when people move from a place of heartbreak to empowerment, I think also a lot has to do with shifting their belief about something. I think we can also stay in grief because we believe maybe that that person didn't love us enough, or that, something had gone wrong. But if we shift into the belief of, this happened for the best, and actually, I wasn't having my needs met, or this wasn't where I, was meant to be, and so I moved on. So when you shift your belief, you can make peace with something, right?
Yeah, well, beliefs are part of our consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so if we recognize that there's a belief there, and this is similar to the attachment thing, or the intelligent message in anything that happens for us that we're having pain over, right? It usually does center around a belief. It's something in our consciousness that we're feeding that is no longer serving for us. And it's incumbent upon us as a human with a mind, body, heart, and soul to adjust it so that it's more serving. So honestly, one of the most, every human being has to walk through a handful of the same certain doors. I'm lovable, changing a belief from I'm unlovable to I'm lovable, I'm unworthy to I'm worthy, I'm undeserving to I'm deserving, and I'm not enough to, oh, I'm more than enough, right? Like, and then fear and doubt are in there too. But those are the big doors that we all walk through. And there's a myriad of experiences that get our attention about one of those doors. I'm using that idea of a door, but it's a doorway to more of who we really are. Oh, this is what I say to myself all the time. If who I really am is this already whole, exquisite light body, and it has extended itself as molecules and atoms that make up this human body that I am, and it extended itself as already whole, then I can't say I'm not whole. I can't say I'm broken. I can't say I'm wounded. I can, but I'm just organizing my belief around it, right? And so then my job is, so that's a lovely, we know when something is like our next level or more serving, or the truth, the greater truth around what we're trying to make the truth, because there's just this sort of like resonance in our heart, or a calming sense that kind of washes through. Then the work isn't done. My job is to live into that as my everyday, all day, 24/7 truth. And for some things that could take a lifetime. And for some things it could take a week, like it just depends on what our overarching soul growth plan is for this particular life.
Do you have a daily practice? Because what you're speaking to, I have had those moments, right, where I feel, okay, I think I can find the acceptance for this. I think I can forgive myself, and it lasts for a little bit, but then I can fall back into that pattern of ruminating, and sort of, we play these games again, whether it's a breakup or a choice we made, where we're like, well, what if I had just done this, or what if this, but it's futile, right? We can't change the past. And I think that's when we can come into peace and forgiveness, is when we finally decide, I'm done with trying to change my past. But that can be a very tempting game to play. I think especially in breakups, I don't know anyone who doesn't spend time going over every conversation and different times and stuff, but
There. Yep.
and you have to do it for a while, but it's when you do it for a long time, it's basically just, I mean, it's
It's
brutal
torture.
too. It's
We're tortured.
torture.
Yes.
Torture, and it really can haunt you. So do you have a little practice that, like, someone like me who really feels ready to let go of this guilt and regret and
Yeah.
release this grief and tap into that knowing that I don't need any choice to be any different, to be at peace, to be connected with love, to be a being of love, and to serve my highest purpose? That's the biggest thing. But I think sometimes that things, again, whether it's losing someone that you truly loved or losing something you really thought you needed or wanted, that it can be hard to sometimes see that you can still connect and still be. I think it comes down to those core things you said, that you still are lovable, right? And that there isn't anything wrong with you, and that, you know, you can still belong and be accepted.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely hear what you're saying. So I do have a practice, and don't let me forget to tell you that. But before, when we get in those down the rabbit hole, we are not connected, right? Because when we're connected, we don't go down rabbit holes, right? When we're connected, we're in a different flow or vibration of life. So anytime we're in a rabbit hole, I think the very first thing it should alert us to is, oh, the only thing that is my job to do right now is to connect. And so that means one has to have a practice for that. That's why I like mindfulness or meditation or, you know, a presence practice, because if we don't have that, that's like just life 101, foundational brick 101. If we don't have that, then we're going to be wobbly and we won't even know how to find our way to connection, right? So most people, I imagine, that listen have some version of that, right? And then the next thing that would be valuable, and this is part of my my personal practice, is I ask a gazillion questions of my heart. I think having inquiries about everything that isn't working, it actually prevents the ego mind from living in a conclusion. So it's either a question or a conclusion. A conclusion of the ego mind is, I'm unlovable. Why the F did this happen? This was terrible. You know, those are all conclusions that the ego mind makes that keep us in like such a stuck, suffering place. But what if we could say things like, you know, higher. Now, for me, I now address the all that is. Sometimes I say source, sometimes I say spirit, sometimes I say divine love. Sometimes I love divine love because that makes it feel very present to me in my heart. But whatever the address is that one uses, it's hand to heart, you know, call that energy in and say, what is the easiest way I can release this? If there's anything that I need to be, if there's a gift in this that I've missed, please make it clear and then teach me or help me to release the energy. Like, it's, you know, we have to call that part of ourselves in order to do the full release. And then you might add things like permanently, like, I'm tired of this back and forth business. Like you mentioned, it's like you connect and then it's back again. I once, in my 30s, I was practicing with co-creation, right? It was like all new to me. And I made this list of a man that I wanted to have in my life. And the guy shows up and he was gay. He's still a dear friend to this day. But I said to the universe, I'm like, seriously, like, it wasn't that kind of obvious. I mean, today it wouldn't be obvious, but this was like, 35 years ago. And so, and here's what I heard. This is the important part from the universe. The universe said, you're learning to be a co-creator with life. You must be clear. So asking questions that include clarity, that asks for clarity of our heart, is a muscle that we should build, that we should be willing to build, because it will help the energy unstick. Like when we ask a question and some of the questions we don't get answers to right away. Some inquiries I've had for a few months, and then all of a sudden, oh, there's the answer. And it comes in weird places, like in a song or, on a magazine cover in the grocery store, that kind of weird place. Or I overhear someone I don't even know say something. It's like, boom, that's the thing, right? So I think that inquiries help to unstick the energy and living in inquiry. I have journals that I have filled over the years of just asking questions, like that has felt very, very, very valuable. The other thing I do is I don't even know where I got this. I think my higher self gave it to me, is I will put something that I'm really done with, right? Like I've been back and forth with it. I've been on a hamster's wheel with it, the tug of war thing, like we've been talking about. I put it on like a platter from my heart center, and I lift it up, and I see light coming in and basically transforming the energy. And I say, I would like to give you this thing. And then I say it, what it is. Please transform all of this energy and feed it back to me as a higher version. And that has worked in many, many occasions quite well.
What does that look like? What would that mean to feed it back to you? And like sort of like, is it again sort of like shifting our beliefs about it and giving it back to you as something different than how we're perceiving it?
I don't put any attachment to that. I trust that it will flow back to me in my next breath as a feeling of balance. I don't really do that. The thing that is more important is the surrender. I think is probably the word that is the overarching theme here for this platter thing. It's a surrendering of the energy and trusting that because I'm surrendering it, and energy, we don't lose energy. It just comes back in different forms, right? So it's going to come back as a higher serving energy. Loss is a beautiful example of that. It's like, okay, I feel like I've gotten everything I can out of this loss. I think that I've seen that, love comes from grander places or my own higher self, the sacred heart of life, the source of all life, and that relying on one little relationship is too limited for who I really am on a, heart soul level. So I think I've gotten that. If there's anything else that I've missed, please make that clear to me. But I'm offering this energy up to you. And I trust that you will serve it back to me in whatever form you deem necessary, because I do trust that my own mind doesn't know how to, label that. If our mind knew how to get us out of loss and grief and all the things, it would have done it by now. It does not know.
Yeah, it's not going to happen through our mind. Thank you so much for that exercise. And what I kind of heard as soon as I put my hand on my heart and sort of asked that question was celebrate yourself. And I appreciated that a lot because I think about, I think what leads to the deepest, most challenging grief in my perception is when you feel rejected. Rejection is a really powerful thing that can feel very hurtful and can create a lot of really stoke up those fires of not being lovable and there's something wrong with me and I don't matter, and some of those deep core beliefs. And that's actually something that I found, again, moving towards empowerment and breakup, is rather than ruminating over, okay, maybe I wasn't this enough, maybe I wasn't that enough, maybe, they're going to find, and having to think about, who are they going to go date next can drive you mad, right? Like, well, they're going to be something I'm not. But then it's like, well, wait a minute, I'm throwing away my entire self, my whole repertoire of all the beautiful things I am for these imagined things that I think weren't good enough, or that they didn't want. And so I've really found, and also in past mistakes, it's like, well, that didn't work out, but look at the things that have worked out, right? So celebrating, if you have a grief over a loss, something that you lost or something that happened that you wish so much didn't happen, you can say, but look at what has happened. Or if you lose a relationship and you feel rejected, you can say, okay, well, I may have, insecurities about what might be deficits, but can I shift from that into celebrating who I am and saying, well, guess what? The next person I meet is going, to see me as all these things that I am, and I'm going to honor and celebrate those things rather than just feel in this place of despair because I feel and fear that I'm not lovable because I
and I think what you're saying is the overarching umbrella. But what do we do when we don't believe that we're celebrating worthy? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that this is just a last really important point. There's always an opposite energy. So rejection is a perfect word, right? When we're feeling an energy that's taking us down, I always I look for the opposite energy. Sometimes I go to the dictionary, the thesaurus, and I look at all the words that are the opposite of rejection. Because if I'm feeling rejected, there's an energy that is asking for my attention, and I find it. And, I love the word acceptance for rejection, right? So, and I go, oh, okay. So if I'm feeling rejection, then my personal medicine that already lives in my heart and soul is acceptance. It's accepting me. It's accepting who I am. It's accepting all the things that I am that, okay, this person, is no longer going to have access to, but it's still who I am. And then we can celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So there's many different means. And I think what can be challenging though is a lot of what we're talking about is just, you talk about doing working with like the life force. It's not tangible. And I think that's challenging for people because a lot of us are very attached to things that we can touch and that we can experience, right? Like that
Right.
is that
But
feels
this is the perfect point. We aren't only that. So our work as human beings is to appreciate the things we can touch, but always drop into our heart for that more stiller, the still point is what I like to call it. Eckhart Tolle talks about it too. He talks about the stillness inside and how the stillness speaks. When we practice that, what stillness has to offer us and teach us and speak to us about is so much more rewarding and gratifying than anything we can find on the outside. So that's our primary work is to cultivate that relationship. We should have dates with ourselves to cultivate that relationship. When we're dating someone, it's a given. We're dating them, right? We're learning about who they are. We're having fun with them. Well, what about date nights with our, or dates period with our higher self, and so that's why I like creativity, which is one of the gifts that you'll be able to give listeners is when we are playing with anything creative, it's like dates. It's like a date with our higher self.
right.
Especially if we include that, if we're intentional, not included, but we're intentional about that. Like, I'm going to go on a date with my higher self, and I'm just going to plant these flowers, and I'm just going to notice how I feel inside, and I'm just going to be with myself, and I'm going to see if there's anything this flower has to wisdom to share with me. It sounds a little flowery, I get it, but anytime we have a date like that, and we're intentional about being connected with our inner self, with our heart, we will get so much more bounty from that than we would from anything on the outside.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in those moments, we're truly communing with that higher love.
We're in union with all of ourselves. And that's the one thing we want more than anything. And we scratch and claw for it on the outside, including
Yeah.
in relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We think that that we have to fight for it and that we need to hold on to it. But it really, and that is another benefit of a breakup is you do tend to spend some time in solitude and alone and you're with yourself. And, again, you can go into the dark place where you just sort of ruminate, but when you're ready, you can step out and say, well, how can I experience love? Just me, just myself. Because I believe a lot of people, that's why some people will rush right into the next relationship because
they don't want to be with themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, they truly believe that they cannot experience love without another, but that's not true, right?
Yes.
Love comes from within. So even with another, they're just, you're eliciting the love within you by your experience with them, but you don't actually need somebody else to elicit that love. It's infinite.
It's a choice to experience life with another person, but we don't get our love from that person. That's not the source of our love.
Yeah. So I think that's powerful. And it can be, I think some people will hear that and can't really quite comprehend it, but maybe after a few times it can kind of open up a doorway to, and maybe by doing little things like that, right? Like when you do go out in a garden and you see you're kind of detached, like leaving your phone inside and just being outside and connecting with something that's growing and blossoming, that's beautiful. And you're not thinking about how someone else is perceiving you and you're just being there. And you're noticing that just like this flower, you too are this blossoming, beautiful thing that is a gift to the world. And
Absolutely.
again, that might sound flowery and woo-woo to people, but it's just the truth. And when you can see that, you can say, even if I've been rejected, even if something happened to me that I feel like can never accept and that feels like the worst thing ever, and even, if I feel flawed, just being here, I am a being of love. I am perfect and a part of the whole, and I can love myself. I can see myself that way.
I think another good practice is not fighting what is happening in the present moment. Like we fight it.
Yeah.
And if we could just take a breath, remember, this is our first job. Remember that we are more than what we are experiencing right now, and accept it. and just let it be what it is. It will flow through. You got to practice that to know that that's true. Even on the hardest stuff, it will work out that way. Unless we give permission to our ego mind to yank it back and start, getting into its tailspin.
Yeah.
And then it's okay if that happens. Just go, okay, there's that part of me that really wants to do that a lot because I feel wronged or whatever. And then just come back.
Yeah.
And that's the work. And sometimes one has to do that incessantly. I know that's been my experience. Incessantly for days until I could actually just have some relief.
Yeah.
But was it worth it? Absolutely. And it builds the muscle.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing that kind of came to me when I had my hand on my heart was to serve others. And I think that when we're kind of stuck in our own grief and really kind of ruminating, it can be powerful to go out and to connect with somebody else and offer somebody else comfort and care and reassurance, that because when you offer somebody else something, you receive it at the same time, because you've
good channel changer. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also just kind of like being out in the garden, it helps you see that no matter what happens to me, I can still be a source of love and comfort to others, no matter what, even if I'm heartbroken. Yeah, that's what we are.
It's that way because we can't be anything other than that.
Yeah. And then so no matter what our grief is, we can see that nothing has truly changed about us. It didn't make us defective.
Exactly. That's a good point, Whitney. The core of who we are never changes. It's held in a whatever you want to call it, in purity. It's unchangeable. It's innocent. And it will never be anything but that. I mean, we can have all kinds of meaning and experiences and stories around that, but our job is to learn from that and come back to that core.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Laurie, thank you so much for this conversation. I obviously feel strongly about this topic, and I think anybody could benefit from hearing it, because it really is truly one of the greatest deviators in life. We can lose ourselves in grief. We can feel like we don't know how to proceed or how to not feel just so regretful and unable to love ourselves because of grief and loss, right? Or to be able to enjoy life.
Yeah, it's a block. It can be a barrier to that for sure. But you've done that a couple times, and you've said just our hand to our heart changes the energy. And that's a simple thing to do. I mean, we could do that standing in the grocery store line and it doesn't look too weird, So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Laurie, thank you so much for joining us. If the audience listening would like to connect with you or work with you, learn more about your work, how can they find you?
Yeah, I think the easiest place, and I don't know if you'll have this in the show notes, is the URL createtohealstudio.com. And will you be posting the gift, which is it's a excuse me, a creative healing process on mending your broken heart?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, just if people feel inclined to explore a little bit of creativity without having to have any, experience in creativity, it's a beautiful process to mend your broken heart.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Really enjoyed this conversation.
My pleasure.
Take care.
Thanks.